I want to take a moment to talk about one big player in the government, James Clevery, the Foreign Secretary. He's defended going to China for talks with officials in Beijing, saying it would not be credible to disengage. After meeting China's Vice President, James Clevery said the trip, the first by such a senior UK figure in 5 years, would help avoid mistrust and errors. But ahead of his visit, some UK MPs attacked the government's approach to China as incoherent. In recent years, of course, UK-Chinese relations have deteriorated. Should we be making friends with China? Let's speak to Kerry Brown, Director of the Lao-China Institute and Professor of Chinese Studies, King's College London. Kerry, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
It's always been a tricky one, this, isn't it, for politicians? And often, as we know, not that I would suggest people are suspicious of politicians, but sometimes they say one thing and actually mean another. They are creating mood music. They're playing to a gallery. We had a clip earlier of Rishi Sunak saying, you know, the relationship with China is kind of over almost. And here's the Foreign Secretary on a visit pressing the flesh. Is that just is it this cat and mouse kind of game that's going to be played forever?
Well, I mean, Britain's had a relationship with China for 450 years, so this is not a new problem. In fact, it's always been an issue that our view of the world is very, very different. The Chinese view, even before the communists came to power in 1949, was very different. And, of course, now there are big political differences. Look, I mean, I think Sunak and Mr. Clevery are just being pragmatic. And there are areas where Britain and China don't really have much choice, but they have to talk. About economics, about, you know, kind of geopolitical issues like Russia and Ukraine, where China is a big player, and also about common interests about the environment. I mean, these are things where you can't avoid China and you can't ignore China. So I think that it's just a pragmatic move to go there, even though there'll be criticism in the UK.
And, of course, China's star, in many respects, is, no pun, but it is rising in terms of its global dominance. That's an irredeemable fact, right? I mean, it may have some issues and it perhaps punches above its weight in some respects, but, I mean, this is a huge powerhouse and growing.
Yes, I think 20% of the world's economy. I mean, look, China's economy at the moment is not in a great position. It's got huge youth unemployment. Its growth rate has slowed down. Yep. I mean, the problem for Britain and others is that a strong China is obviously a big, big challenge, for sure. But a failing or a collapsing China is an even bigger problem. So we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. I think the main thing for Britain is that the world's second biggest economy, China, is not as important in Britain as it should be. And since leaving the European Union, obviously, Britain has got to create a bilateral relationship with China. Before 2020, it was much more through the European Union. So basically, this is an important first step in trying to get a better sort of a balance in the relationship.
In terms of how we describe China, and I'll just give you a sort of a lay view on this. This is your area of expertise, of course, Kerry, but I mean, this is still a communist state in some respects. The leader, of course, isn't the president. He's a chairman, etc. So it creates this sort of veneer of modernity and progression in that, yes, we do capitalism better than America does, but actually behind the scenes, underneath the skin of all of that, is still a rather fairly vicious regime, domestically and otherwise. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, the leadership of Xi Jinping is very centralizing. I mean, it's not an easy partner. The system in China has always been politically very different to Britain. We shouldn't have any illusions about that. It's a hybrid system. I mean, the capitalism in China is sometimes a bit rawer and even more competitive than the capitalism here. I mean, there are many, many issues. But we have to remember there's about 500 million middle-class, emerging middle-class people in China. They send something like 160,000 of the students to Britain for our universities, which are big funders of British universities. These are people that are also potential users of British services. It's a big, big potential market. And that's not about the Communist Party. That's about, you know, a rising middle class is important and we can't ignore.
But also, they're also, on the global stage. You know, they've worked out that Africa being the obvious example, you know, there's a place that we can, you know, buy up, essentially, to coin a phrase, and we can exploit, I mean that in an economic sense, as much of it as we can. You know, they're going to be the first in that particular race for finding new markets and the like, and will become, one assumes, ever more dominant as a result.
Well, anyone who's worked in Africa or the other emerging markets will know they're not easy places to work. Britain has been doing things there for a long time and had some pretty searing experiences. China, well, good luck. I mean, if they want to buy up Africa, they're going to buy up a lot of very tough customers.
Yeah, true.
I think China is, you know, trying to do a lot of things. It's going to have a lot of learning to do. The idea that it's sort of, you know, just dominating everything, I think, is a bit of a fairy tale. It's got to deal with the world as it is, and that world sometimes is going to be very difficult for China.
Do you like it, Kerry? I mean, you've been there. I mean, in the sense of, as a country, you know, we nip over to Spain and we say we had a lovely time, and you might be a bit more ambitious and go to Russia and you can look at the, you know, the architecture and understand the kind of political terrain. Where does China sit in a break?
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in China for nearly 6 years. I've been going to China since 1991. I've been there about 100 times. Yeah, of course I like China. I think Chinese people have always been good friends. I mean, individually, it's always been a great relationship. It's a very different view of the world. It's a very different kind of culture. Sometimes that's stimulating. Sometimes it's challenging.
There it is. Listen, fascinating stuff, Kerry. Thank you. Really appreciate your time, sir. Kerry Brown. He's director of the Lao China Institute, professor of Chinese Studies, King's College London. Thank you to him.